Hello and welcome to today's edition of the Daf Yomi, Bava Metzia Daf 100 Amud B. So let's go. Excuse me. The Gemara challenges Shmuel's interpretation. If the dispute is over, which says garment was sold, the seller should not be required to take an oath, as that which the buyer claimed from him, the seller did not admit at all, and that which the seller admitted to, the buyer had not claimed from him. The Gemara answers, Shmuel was referring to a case like that which Rav Papa said below. The dispute is with regard to a garment that was formed from several pieces of cloth that were attached together. Here too, the dispute is with regard to a garment that was formed from several pieces of cloth that were attached together, and the disagreement was about how much of that garment was actually sold. Rabbi Hashaya found Shmuel's interpretation difficult. Does the Mishnah teach a garment? No, it teaches a slave. How can Shmuel claim that the dispute about a garment? Rather, Rabbi Hashaya said, the Mishnah is referring to a case where the buyer claimed a large slave along with his garment. So what does that mean? And in the footnote, Kagon shet ano even b'chsuso. According to the interpretation of the Mishnah, if the seller takes the oath, the buyer is entitled to take only a small slave and its clothes. Similarly, when the Mishnah states that in a case in which the seller admits that he does not know what happened, and the buyer is entitled to take the large one, it would appear that it means that he is entitled to take both the large slave and his clothes. The Ramban explains that this is due to the halacha that one who is unable to take an oath must pay the entire sum that was claimed. Therefore, since the seller cannot take an oath about either the slave or his clothes, the buyer should be entitled to take both. This conclusion poses a difficulty in a commentary that's from the Rashba and Bava Metzia. They claim that the halacha is one who is unable to take an oath must pay the entire sum that was claimed, does not apply to an oath that was acquired only by extending another oath that he was required to take. In fact, due to this difficulty, the Baal HaMa'or claims that if the buyer claimed a large slave along with his garment, the buyer would not be entitled to take the slave himself, rather only his clothes. The other commentaries do not draw this conclusion. Some suggest that in order to resolve the difficulty, those commentators will concede that where the claimant has a certain claim and the defendant has an uncertain claim, the halacha of one who is unable to take an oath does apply to an extended oath, or where he claimed a large field along with its sheaves. Since the seller admits to the part of the claim about the garment or sheaves, he is required to take an oath about them. Once he is required to take that oath, it can be extended to require him to take an oath even concerning the claim about the slave or field itself, like Mars. But still, in a dispute over which type of garment was sold, and that was the buyer claimed from him, and the seller did not admit at all, so that the seller and that which the seller admitted to, the buyer had not claimed from him. Now, Gemara answers, Rav Papa said the dispute is with regard to a garment that was formed from several pieces of cloth that were attached together. The dispute concerns how much the garment was actually sold. Rav Sheshet found Rabbi Shai's interpretation difficult. Does the Mishnah come only to teach us the halacha of binding? Rav Sheshet found it difficult that according to Rabbi Shai's interpretation, the Mishnah teaches a ruling as already explicitly taught elsewhere, but this difficulty would appear to be even more pronounced according to Rav and Shmuel's interpretation, according to which the Mishnah does not appear to teach any ruling above and beyond that of the previous Mishnah. According to their interpretation, the only distinction between the Mishnayot is that the former involves a rental and the latter involves a sale. Apparently, the reason that Rav Sheshet questions only Rav Shai's interpretation is that he understands that according to Rav and Shmuel, the very fact that the halacha applies to both a sale and a rental is a novelty that justifies teaching an extra Mishnah. But from the fact that Rabbi Shai explains that the novelty is about the halacha binding, it is apparent he does not consider the distinction between a sale and a rental to be of significance. So Rabbi Shai should therefore question specifically an interpretation of the halacha of binding has already been taught elsewhere, seeing Shittim Mechubeses and the Bar. But we already learned that halacha in a Mishnah, condition 26a. Generally, one is not obligated to take an oath concerning the denial of a claim with regard to land. In a legal dispute involving both land and movable property, if the defendant admits to part of the claim with regard to the movable property, thereby rendering himself obligated to take an oath, denying any responsibility for the remaining property, the movable property binds the property that serves as a guarantee, i.e. the land. that he is forced to take an oath concerning land as well. Rather, Rav Sheshet said, in accordance with whose opinion is this Mishnah? It is Bava Metzia, who said the legal status of a slave is like that of movable property. Even if the dispute is over the slave alone, the seller can be required to take an oath. I will ask, but still, if the dispute is over which the slave was sold, then that which the buyer claimed from him, the seller did not admit to at all, and that which the seller admitted to, the buyer had not claimed from him. The seller should not therefore be required to take an oath. The Gemara answers, the Tana of the Mishnah holds in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Gamliel, as we learned in the Mishnah Shavuot 38b, if one claimed wheat from another, and the defendant admitted to only to owing him barley, the defendant is exempt from having to take an oath, but Rabbi Gamliel deems him liable. The Gemara asks, still, with regard to a small slave, this is the case of, here you are, when the slave is immediately available to be taken. The small slave is not considered to be part of the buyer's claim, as his claim is limited to the difference between the values of the slaves, and that amount is being entirely denied. Consequently, there should be no requirement to take an oath. To resolve this difficulty, Bava said, in the case of a slave, the Mishnah is referring to a case where after the sale, the seller severed the slave's hand, and in the case of a field, it is a case where after the sale, the seller dug pits, ditches, and caves in it, and therefore he cannot say, here you are. The Gemara offers another challenge to Rav Sheshet's interpretation, but Rabbi Meir teaches the opposite. Rabbi Meir, Ibcha Shaminan Lei. Why does the Gemara insist on interpreting the Mishnah as being in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Meir, which requires that the opinions of the Mishnah and Tractate Bava Metzia be reversed? Rather, they explain it more simply as being in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis. The Mishnah explains that even were the Mishnah to be explained in accordance with the rabbis, it would still not be in accordance with the accepted halacha. Therefore, the Gemara considered it more reasonable to interpret it as being in accordance with Rabbi Meir, since there is a principle that an uninterpreted Mishnah is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Meir. As we know in the Mishnah in Bava Kama 96b, if one robbed another of an animal and aged, and declined the value while in his possession, or if one robbed another Canaanite slave and they aged, since they are no longer in the condition in which they were when he robbed them, he cannot return them in their current state to his victim. Rather, he pays according to the value at the time of the robbery. Rabbi Meir says, with regard to slave, he says to the victim, that which is yours is before you, and no compensation is required. Apparently, Rabbi Meir holds that the legal status of a slave is like that of land, and not, as Rav Sheshet said, like that of movable property. The Gemara answers, it's not difficult. Rav Sheshet apparently holds like Rabbi Avu, who reversed the attribution of the opinion in that Mishnah teaches. Rabbi Meir says, he paid according to the value at the time of the robbery. And the rabbis say, with regard to slaves, he says to the victim, that which is yours is before you, and no compensation is required. So Rabbi Sheshet interprets the Mishnah as referring to a case where the dispute is over the slave alone, interprets it being in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Meir. He apparently also assumes that Rabbi Meir holds that an oath is taken even with regard to a claim of land, as he has his explanation would need to account for the case in the Mishnah concerning a dispute over the small or large field. There were questions this assumption, but given that Rabbi Meir said only that the legal status of a slave is not like movable property, from where does Rav Sheshet learn that Rabbi Meir holds when we compare land to a slave? So just as for a claim about a slave, an oath is taken, so too for a claim about land, an oath is taken. Perhaps Rabbi Meir holds that an oath is taken only on a claim about a slave, but not on a claim about land. With regard to what oaths are not taken, al-maj ein nishba'im, one does not take an oath of admission to part of a claim if the claim concerns land, slaves, documents, or property consecrated in the temple treasury. Rambam Sefer Mishpatim Hilchot Torin V'Nitan 5:1 Shulchan Aruch Mishpat 95:1. The Gemara answers, you should not enter your mind that Rabbi Meir makes a distinction between slaves and land in this regard, as the Torah advisor, with regard to one exchanges a cow for a donkey, such that by virtue of the cow owner's act of acquisition on the donkey, the donkey's erstwhile owner simultaneously acquires the cow, wherever it happens to be located. If after the fowl is found to have calved, and similarly with regard to one who sells a Canaanite maidservant, with the acquisition affected by the buyer giving him money, and afterwards she is found to have given birth to a child, who will be a slave belonging to the mother's master. At times, it is uncertain when the offspring was born before or after the transaction. If this seller says, the birth occurred while the cow or maidservant was still in my possession, and that buyer remains silent, the seller is entitled to take the offspring. In this case, there is a clash between a certain claim and an uncertain claim. According to the opinion that a certain claim against an uncertain claim is sufficient to allow one to repossess another's property, then that is the reason that in this case the seller prevails. According to the opinion that a certain claim against an uncertain claim is not sufficient, the reason the seller prevails is that the buyer's signs is tantamount to admission of the seller's claim. That's from Touch of Bava 96b, see the smart. The other footnote, in a case of one who sold a cow maidservant who was pregnant at the time, and after the sale it was found that the cow had calved or maidservant had given birth, if one party claims that the birth occurred while it was in his possession and the other party remained silent, then the former is entitled to take the offspring. That's from the Bava Metzia Daf, 2011, Shulchan Aruch Mishpat 223, 2-3. It's entitled to take the offspring. If this one says, I do not know what happened, and that one says, I do not know what happened, they divide the offspring between them. If the seller says the birth occurred while the cow or maidservant was still in my possession, and the buyer says that the birth occurred after the cow or maidservant was already in my possession, then the seller takes an oath stating that the cow or maidservant gave birth in his possession, and then entitled to take the offspring. This is because for anyone who takes an oath required by Torah law, he takes the oath and does not have to pay. There are 3 cases of oaths required by Torah law: an oath of one who admits to part of a claim, an oath to refuse the claim of a single witness, and an oath taken by a bailey. In all these cases, one takes the oath and is then exempt from paying. The sages instituted the taking of an oath in additional cases, and in some of those cases, the one who takes the oath thereby becomes entitled to collect payment in accordance with his claim. And that's from the Bava Metzia Daf, Binatan 1-2, Shulchan Aruch Mishpat 89-1. This is the statement of Rabbi Meir. And the rabbis say, one does not take an oath, not on a claim concerning slaves, and not on a claim concerning land. The Gemara explains this proof from this brisa. Since the rabbis replied to Rabbi Meir that an oath is not taken on a claim concerning slaves or land, it is not correct that by inference Rabbi Meir holds that one can take an oath on a claim concerning either slaves or land. The Gemara rejects this inference. But from where is this inferred? Perhaps the rabbis are speaking to him utilizing the style of just as, and they are saying as follows: just as you concede to us with regard to land, concede to us also with regard to slaves. The Gemara adds, Know that Rabbi Meir holds that one does not take an oath for a claim concerning land, as in the Mishnah Shavuot 42b. Rabbi Meir says there are some matters that have a legal status like that of land, but nevertheless, with regard to oath, they are not treated like land, and so one takes an oath with regard to them. But the rabbis do not concede to Rabbi Meir that this is a law. How so? If one claims, I delivered 10 vines laden with grapes to you, Esa Gafonim Mastalti Lecha. Rashi Gittin 39 explains that this is a case where the owner gave the vines to a bailey for him to safeguard, and his claim against him is based on the halacha of baileys. This is also the understanding of the Rambam. And the other says there are only 5. Rabbi Meir deems him liable to take an oath of one who admits to part of a claim. But the rabbis say anything that is attached to the ground has a legal status like that of land. So no oath is taken with regard to them. The Gemara clarifies the scope of the dispute. And Rabbi Yossi Bar Hanina says the difference between them is only in the case of grapes that are ready to be picked. In a case where one claims from another grapes that are ready to be picked or dry grain that is ready to be reaped, the defendant admitted to part of the claim. If the produce has developed to a stage where it no longer needs to be attached to the ground, then it is classified as movable property, and the defendant takes an oath of one who admits to part of a claim, said the Rambam. Some say that Rabbi Yossi Bar Hanina was referring to a case where the grapes had been picked and consumed and the claim was for their value, and that only in that case is there an oath. If the claim was for extant grapes or grain, then it is a situation where one says to the other, here you are, for which an oath is not required, says the Ran. Others explain that the case is where the claim was for grapes or grain itself. The defendant admitted to part of the claim, but he had also consumed that produce, so it is not a case of here you are. The early commentaries explain that Rambam rules in accordance with Rabbi Meir, the Rav in the Maggid Mishnah. The Shach and the Gra explain that the Rambam holds that the Mishnah interpreted Shavuot is referring to a case where vines were given to another to safeguard. Only in such a case might they be classified as land. For a sale, they would certainly be classified as movable property. The Shach rules in accordance with those who argue against the ruling of the Rambam. Rambam said Mishpat Mechut Te'on Venitan 5.4, Shulchan Aruch Mishpat 95.2. As one sage Rabbi holds, they are considered as though they are already harvested, meaning that they are regarded as movable property with regard to that to which an oath is taken. On the other stage of rabbis hold, they are not considered as though they were about to be paid, meaning that they are regarded as land, with regard to which an oath is not taken. Evidently, Rabbi Meir agrees that an oath is not taken concerning land. Well, actually, the Mishnah can be explained in accordance with the interpretation of Rabbi Shaya, as cited above, and with regard to that which poses a difficulty for you, namely that according to his explanation, the novelty of the Mishnah is only that movable property binds land, and so that one can be required to take an oath with regard to it. And Halacha is already taught in the Mishnah the Kedushin. One can explain that it was necessary to also teach that this in the Mishnah here, because it might enter your mind to say that the garment of a slave is like a slave himself, or that sheaves of a field are like the field itself. If so, there would be no basis to acquire an oath, even one based on the claims about the garment and the sheaves themselves. Therefore, the Mishnah teaches us that they are considered distinct items, and the claims concerning them require the seller to take an oath, which can then be extended to acquire an oath for the claim concerning the stable land. The Gemara analyzes one of the clauses of the Bava cited above. In a case in which it is unclear when a cow or maidservant gave birth, if this one says, I do not know what happened, and that one says, I do not know what happened, they divide the offering between them. The Gemara asks, in accordance with whose opinion is this? Is according to the opinion of Samachos, who says, when there is a property of uncertain ownership, the parties divide it equally between them. The Gemara questions this attribution. If so, say and try to explain according to the latter clause of that Bava. If the seller says the birth occurred while the cow or maidservant was still in my possession, and the buyer says the birth occurred after the cow or maidservant was already in my possession, then the seller takes an oath stating that it gave birth in his possession, and he is then entitled to take the offspring. The Gemara explains the difficulty, but according to the opinion of Rav Huna, who says yes, the Malchus said his ruling, even in the case in which there is a conflict between a certain and a certain claim. Why does the Mishnah rule that the seller takes an oath? The Mishnah should have ruled that they divide the value of the disputed offspring between them. The Gemara answers, so Malchus concedes that where there is a requirement for one of the parties to take an oath required by Torah, that disputed amount is not divided. And furthermore, this is not a case in which the seller could say, here you are, because the case is where after the sale, the seller severed the slave's hand, just like in the explanation of above, in the case of one who sells his olive trees to another, so they can chop them down and use them for their wood. What's the footnote? Hamocha zeisav le'ezim, eitzim. If one sells his olive trees to another for their wood, instructing the buyer to chop them down immediately, then any olives that they yield belong to the seller. If he did not stipulate this condition, then any olives yielded belong to the buyer. In a case where at the time of the sale, the party specified that when the trees were to be cut down, and the olives that grew are able to provide less than the value of a quarter log of oil per seah, excluding the expenses involved in the production of the oil, then the olives belong to the buyer. If the olives can provide more than that value, then the buyer and seller divide the olives between them. Bava Metzia Daf said Hinem for 11 Shulchan Aruch Mishpat 168.2. And before he chopped them down, they yielded olives. If the olives are of a quality that could provide the value of less than a quarter log, the referring to a quarter measure. The Me'imi maintains that this is the standard quarter log, while Ben Hananel says that it refers to a quarter log. And before he chopped them down, they yielded olives. If the olives are of a quality that could provide the value of less than a quarter log of oil, some explain that the Mishnah is referring to the volume of olives that grew in an area of a Beit Seah. Rabbeinu Hananel, Rabbi Yonatan, others say that the reference is to a seah of olives, which is smaller than Melech Shlomo. According to both explanations, the Mishnah is referring to olive trees of poor quality which produce very little oil. By contrast, the Ritva asserts that it is referring to unripe olives, which, since they are picked before they fully develop, contain little oil per seah of olives. These olives are the property of the new owner of the olive trees, either by if they yielded olives more. If the yielded olives that could provide the value of a quarter log or more of oil per se of olives, and this one the buyer says, my olive trees yielded the olives, and so I have a right to them, and that one says, the seller says, the nourishment from my land yielded the olives, so I have a right to him, then divided the olives between them. Yechaloku, they divide. In this case, the ruling of the parties divide the olives is not due to any uncertainty with regard to ownership of the olives, rather because both parties have a genuine claim to them, as both the buyer's trees and seller's land contribute to the olives' growth. Rambam's commentary on the Mishnah. In the event that a river swept away one's olive trees, Shataf Nahar Zeisav, generally when a river carries one's property away, it is assumed that the owner despairs of recovering it and gives up its ownership of it. Clearly, the Mishnah assumes that in this case, the owner retains the ownership. The Me'ir explains that the case where the owner chased after his tree in order to save it, thereby demonstrating that he did not despair of recovering it, and deposited them in the field of another, and they took root there and yielded olives. This one, I, the owner of the trees, says my olive trees yielded the olives, and so I have a right to them. And that one, I, the owner of the field, says the nourishment is from my land, yielded the olives, and I have a right to them, so that they divide the olives between them. The Gemara asks, what are the circumstances of the sale? If this is a case where before the sale the seller said to the buyer, cut down the trees immediately, then clearly he is particular that the buyer does not derive benefit from the nourishment provided by his land. Therefore, even the olives yielded could provide less than the value of a quarter log or per se of olives. They would belong to the owner of the land, i.e. the seller. Conversely, if the case is where he said to him, cut down the trees whenever you want, then it is clear that he is not particular about the buyer deriving benefit from the nourishment provided by his land. Therefore, even if the olives yielded could provide the value of a quarter log or more of oil per se of olives, they belong to the owner of the olive trees, either by. The Gemara explains, no, the ruling is necessary in a case where the seller said to him, cut down the trees without specification about when he should do so. Accordingly, if the olives yielded produce less than the value of a quarter log of oil per se of olives, and since people are generally not particular to receive their share of olives, the buyer may keep them. But where the olives yielded either produce of a quarter log or more of oil per se of olives, people are generally particular to receive their share of such olives. Consequently, they divide the olives between them. Rabbi Shimon ben Pati says, and the value of a quarter log that they mentioned in the Mishnah is inclusive of the expense of processing the olives to produce oil. That last sentence moved on to the next daf. Thank you for listening. Wish you all the best. Have a good day and peace in Israel. Take care. Bye.